Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the Jewish Democratic Council of America's Michigan 11 Democratic Candidate Forum. I'm Jordan Odell. I'm proud to co-chair the JDCA's Michigan chapter along with Adam Blank. Over the past 4 years, JDCA has established itself as the national voice of Jewish Democrats through advocacy and electoral work rooted in our Jewish and democratic values. As Jews, as Democrats, and as Michigan residents, we don't have the luxury of disengaging from politics or assuming the right decisions will just be made for us. We saw here at home, right-wing militia members storm our state capitol with heavy weapons. We felt how close to home the recent Oxford school shooting was. We're concerned that Michigan's among the handful of states with laws already in place that would automatically make abortion illegal if Roe v. Wade's overturned, and we fear it will be. Michigan's a battleground state, and it's our Jewish and democratic values that are at the center of this battle. So it's up to us to make sure we elect leaders who promote our values. That's why I hope you'll get involved with the Jewish Dems Michigan chapter, where this May we'll have the chance to meet our elected representatives in Congress during JDCA's virtual week of action. We'll also be doing everything we can to increase Jewish voter engagement and turn out the Jewish vote for the midterms. Please join our chapter, including if you're interested, by taking a leadership position with our steering committee. Just email outreach@jewishdems.org or visit our website at jewishdems.org/chapters to sign up or let any of us know. With that, I'd like to thank our representatives, Haley Stevens and Andy Levin, for spending time with us today. And I'll now turn it over to JDCA's CEO, Haley Soifer, who will explain the rules and moderate today's forum.
Thank you, Jordan, and thanks to Representatives Stevens and Levin for joining us today. As we approach the critically important midterm elections, JDCA is taking action to advocate for our values and elect those who share our values. Not only is JDCA mobilizing voters, we are also helping Jewish voters around the country make informed decisions before they vote. And candidates forums like this one are one way we are doing that. It's integral to our work. Before we begin, I'll go over the rules for today's forum, which have been shared in advance with both candidates. First, this is an issues forum and not a debate. Candidates will answer the questions addressing the audience and will not engage with, address, or refer to each other. There will be no rebuttals. If there's a violation of this rule, candidates will receive one warning. After that, as the moderator, I will cut candidates off for violating this rule. Second, this is not a campaign event. Candidates will not ask for votes or support. They will be sharing their views on a range of issues of importance to Jewish voters. Third, there will be time limits. Candidates will have 2 minutes for introductory remarks followed by questions, which they will have 1.5 minutes to answer. We will alternate the order for our responses. And finally, at the end of the forum, candidates will have the opportunity to make 2-minute closing statements. As a reminder, we kindly ask the candidates to adhere to the time limits and the rules. And when time is up, a sign will appear on the screen, and we ask that you please complete your sentence. If you continue speaking beyond the time limit, you will hear a bell. We're supposed to hear the bell. Well, you'll hear a bell and you'll know that it's the bell, and that is the sign to please stop speaking. So thank you. We are now thrilled to begin this forum in this critically important Democratic primary in Michigan's 11th district, where there are 2 incumbent members of Congress running against each other. So we will start today hearing from both of them. First, Representative Stevens, followed by Representative Levin for their opening statements. Over to you, Congresswoman Stevens.
Well, thank you so much for today's forum, and good afternoon to the Jewish Democratic Council of America. I am Congresswoman Haley Stevens, proudly representing Michigan's 11th District, a seat that we flipped from red to blue in 2018 to become the first Democrat since before the moon landing to hold this seat. And I did so working alongside your incredible organization. I also became the first woman to ever hold this seat in history and the first millennial that Michigan ever sent to Congress. Previous to serving in Congress, I was working in a variety of economic development and advanced manufacturing jobs. I served as chief of staff on the U.S. Auto Rescue in the Obama administration, the initiative responsible for saving General Motors and Chrysler and 200,000 Michigan jobs. Since getting elected to Congress, I serve on the Science Committee, where I'm the vice chair, and the subcommittee chair for research and technology. My first bill, the Building Blocks of STEM Act, was signed into law in 2019, and I have been focused on doing and delivering for the people of Michigan's 11th district, which is why I'm running for re-election in Michigan's 11th district, the seat, given redistricting, that has the largest concentration of my constituents, and is also now the Oakland County seat for Michigan. So as the daughter of Oakland County, as someone who met my husband at Birmingham Seaholm High School, and we have all our families who live in this district, it's a really exciting thing to be with all of you today. And I just have to say that JDCA, your values of progressive, pro-Israel, Jewish community values so align with who I am as a member of Congress, focused on reproductive rights, gun safety, the environment, and on. I know you are focused on a wide range of issues and have been so successful in that effort. So today's forum is going to be a real delight. And again, I'm honored to be with all of you. Thank you.
There's the bell. Thank you, Congressman Levin.
Well, thanks so much, Haley Seufer and JDCA, for organizing this forum, and to everyone for joining us today. I'm really looking forward to a robust discussion. My life's work in the labor movement, the human rights movement, the climate movement is deeply rooted and informed by my Jewish identity and values and my family's commitment to Tikkun Olam. My great-grandparents were the first Jews in the little country town of Birmingham, Michigan in the 1890s. Their grandsons, my Uncle Carl and my dad Sandy, would go on to break barriers, becoming the first Jewish senator from Michigan and the longest serving siblings in the 233-year history of the United States Congress. I grew up down Woodward in Berkeley in the shadow of Shrine of the Little Flower, Father Coughlin's church, where I experienced intense and open anti-Semitism. However, I also discovered the strength I could draw from a vibrant and resilient Jewish community, and how to build movements to unite diverse people across all forms of hatred. Before I was elected in 2018, I served on the board of my synagogue in Maryland and as president of my congregation here in Oak Park. And I envisioned and helped create Detroit Jews for Justice, mobilizing Jews to fight for racial and economic justice, a movement still going strong today, as witnessed by last weekend's raucous Purim Spiel event. My Judaism has guided my work on human rights, reproductive justice, economic justice, and environmental justice in Congress. So today I'm excited to replicate the robust conversations that happen around our family's Shabbat supper table. When we join together from a place of shared understanding and stand together in community, there's no problem we cannot solve. Thanks.
Great. Well, thank you both for the opening statements. We will now move to questions. We're going to start with domestic policy, followed by a series of questions on foreign policy. Our first question is on voting rights. JDCA has strongly supported ongoing efforts to protect our democracy and the right to vote through federal legislation, including the For the People Act, the Freedom to Vote Act, and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. Meanwhile, Republicans have spent the past year blocking these measures and both proposing and enacting legislation at the state level, including voter suppression and election subversion measures. What is your position with regard to defending our democracy and right to vote? And what concrete actions have you taken or supported in Congress to address this issue? We will begin with Representative Levin.
Thanks, Haley. Well, I'm an original co-sponsor of every single one of the bills you represented. But I think we have to go beyond that and we have to lead on the issue. And therefore, I've also introduced legislation of my own. I've worked with Senator John Ossoff to introduce the Election Worker and Polling Place Protection Act. He in the Senate, me in the House, to safeguard our elections and the men and women who carry them out. The clerks, their staff, the volunteers who work in the polling places, the people who work on the voting machines, as well as the polling places and the machines themselves. And I also partnered with Matt Cartwright and others in the House to introduce the Time to Vote Act. So poor and working class citizens have 2 hours of paid time off to make sure they can exercise their right to vote on election day. Importantly, I am a longtime champion of eliminating the filibuster. And that has been the blockage that's prevented Joe Manchin from even getting his own bill passed to protect our elections. He's a former Secretary of State, and he wouldn't even modify the filibuster enough to pass his own legislation. So this is a sacred trust. It's the most important thing we could do. And I'm going to be on the front lines to protect our democracy.
Thank you, Congresswoman Stevens.
Well, first of all, thanks to the Right. I see this as part of the charge of why I and we have to do everything we can to do so this term in Congress and everything to do so next term in Congress, because in addition to being an original co-sponsor of the 3 bills that you mentioned, one of my first actions when I got into Congress in 2019, pre-pandemic, is I got young people together in my congressional office in Michigan's 11th district to engage in a voting rights forum alongside our Secretary of State, the Voters Not Politician organization, as well as the ACLU. I firmly believe we got to engage the next generation to ensure that we are enshrining voting rights laws throughout this nation. We see in Michigan in particular, we got a ballot initiative done in 2018 and unlocked a lot of channels. Now we see the next round, Republicans are coming back within our own state to repeal our voting rights. This has already happened in other places around this country, and it's an absolute assault on where we need to be. On the Science Committee, I've also led and participated in hearings that have focused on security. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Now we all hear the bell. Okay, we will move on to our second question. JDCA continues to prioritize combating anti-Semitism, domestic extremism, and white supremacy. In recent years, we've experienced the rise of hatred, including in Michigan, where right-wing extremists protested outside the state capitol in Lansing, not once, but twice in 2020, stormed the Capitol building, and even plotted to kidnap the governor. How do you view this issue, and what steps can be taken to combat the rise of right-wing extremism, anti-Semitism, and white supremacy? Congresswoman Stevens will go first.
Well, certainly we cannot be combating anti-Semitism in a vacuum. This is one of the reasons why I have pushed for this special envoy to combat anti-Semitism in the State Department to get confirmed. We're still waiting on that. We need to take a global viewpoint. We need to take a national viewpoint. And we as members of Congress need to go within our own communities and reach out to the schools. I just recently visited our Holocaust Remembrance Center in Farmington Hills, and talk to them about how they're engaging schools, not just at the high school level, but at all ages, and particularly post-secondary, working with adults. We obviously need to call out anti-Semitism wherever we see it, and we also need to invest in the resources to combat it, which is also why I sent a letter through to our Justice Department asking and checking in on those resources, particularly at the state level as it relates to the FBI. And And look, we are also seeing this on college campuses as well, which is also why I spend time visiting college campuses, talking to students who feel attacked and persecuted because of anti-Semitism. It is unacceptable. We will continue to call it out. We need to invest. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. Go ahead.
You ready for me?
Yes, please go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Well, so we have to loudly and consistently call out anti-Semitism in all its forms, whether it comes from our adversaries or our friends, and whether it's promulgated intentionally or unknowingly. And we have to strive to do so in a way that truly fosters understanding. The fight against anti-Semitism demands that we bring communities together for interfaith dialogue, to build resilience, to build coalitions against all manifestations of hate and white supremacy. After all, the data are really clear and really overwhelming. The main source of anti-Semitism in this country is white supremacists. And the vast majority of anti-Semitic acts of violence in the US come from that source. I'm proud to work in coalition within the Caucus on Black-Jewish Relations, the Latino Jewish Caucus, and the Task Force Combating Anti-Semitism, and to be known in Congress and in our community as a bridge builder and a moral voice on the issue. And finally, the Senate needs to hurry up and confirm Professor Deborah Lipstadt as U.S. Special Envoy to combat anti-Semitism. It's about time. Thanks.
Thank you. For many Americans, the past several years have been an awakening about the pervasive issue of racial injustice and the ongoing struggle for racial equity in the United States. What steps have you taken in Congress and will you take if reelected to address racial injustice? Congressman Levin will go first.
Thanks, Haley. So first of all, I go out in the street and march for Black lives and proclaim Black Lives Matter in our community. Secondly, I think uniquely in Congress, I have created Martin Luther King Weekend Student Summit every year to help work with kids to realize that what was Dr. King about? Not social service, but social change, and that we have to fight for the transformation of our society. I held a different event recently to talk with Black youth about voting rights. But I think the most important thing is that I bake racial justice into all the bills that I write, because racism, structural racism pervades housing. It pervades the employment world. It pervades all aspects of American life. So, for example, my EV Freedom Act that I introduced with AOC, and that's been supported by utilities, auto companies, unions, and so forth, requires that 40% of all the investment go in frontline and communities of color, so that when we have high-speed charging infrastructure all throughout the United States, for example, if we need some on I-94 in the western part of Michigan, let's put it in Benton Harbor, where after all, it's going to take a half hour to charge. Let people go shop and eat there instead of a less disadvantaged community. So I think it's something we have to do in all of our work. And of course, I've voted for all the racial justice legislation, like our recent anti-lynching bill. Thanks.
Thank you. Representative Stevens.
Yeah, thank you. So as it pertains to the topic of racial injustice in this country, I believe that we've got to go back to history. This is why I'm a co-sponsor of a bill called HR 40 that will study the impacts and effects on slavery. It is being led by Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. I also mentioned that I serve on the Science Committee. I'm the vice chair of the Science Committee under the leadership of Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson, the first African-American to ever be elected to Congress from the state of Texas. And what we are working on in that committee is equity. I passed a bill to double scientific research funding in this country, but enshrined in that bill was the equity and inclusion piece. I do Manufacturing Mondays, visiting small businesses, visiting training centers, talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm a proud and original co-sponsor of the George Floyd Justice in Policing bill, something that we need to get done in order to respond to the reckoning that came from George Floyd's death, but also the repeated injustices that we see in our criminal justice system that frankly, in a country, right, where you have Black men who are 5 times more likely to go to prison than a white man, we have a problem. We are in a moment of reckoning. And so not only do we need to bring all stakeholders to the table, which I work on through my different committees and my task force, alongside colleagues who are focused on advanced manufacturing and science, we need to do so through our Department of Justice as well as within our communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Decades of Republican-led tax cuts for the wealthy, attacks on social infrastructure, and efforts to weaken organized labor have all contributed to economic inequality. This was painfully apparent during the COVID-19 pandemic as essential workers, small business owners, and everyday Americans bore the brunt of economic hardship. What measures have you supported to reverse these trends, and what steps do you support to advance economic justice for all Americans? We will begin with Representative Stevens.
Yeah, well, this one is near and dear to my heart as someone who served in the Economic Development Administration in the Obama years, focused on investing in distressed communities and rebuilding communities throughout the Midwest. And you hit the nail on the head, Haley, that when we saw this pandemic hit, we had small businesses at astronomical rates bear the brunt of the effects of this pandemic, but certainly small businesses that were minority owned at a much higher risk of closing. I think the statistic was about 9 out of 10 small businesses that were owned by a person of color either closed or were at threat of closing at one point in the last 2 years. And so this is why I introduced legislation to increase the investments in small businesses at the minority ownership level. This is a piece of legislation that will create a venture capital type of fund through the Department of Commerce, grants that small businesses can access so that they can connect to resources that they traditionally wouldn't do so. And also along those lines is we need to visit with small businesses, which is what I do every single day on this job. I have a program also called Women Own Wednesdays, where I sit down with women business owners, because women have been left out in this pandemic as well, and bringing in their intersectional issues into my policy making work.
Thank you, Congressman Levin.
Thanks, Haley. Well, I'm the union organizer in the Congress, Haley. I have been fighting for income and wealth equality for 40 years. And that's why the staff of the Congress came to me to introduce the resolution so that they themselves could finally have collective bargaining. I was the lead whip for the PRO Act, the Protecting the Right to Organize Act. The Speaker asked me to give the final speech on the House floor to battle off the Republicans and pass the Protecting the Right to Organize Act. I was also a whip on the Raise the Wage Act, and I voted against every single Republican amendment in the Education and Labor Committee that would have weakened or been a poison pill and killed the Raise the Wage Act. And really importantly, as a whip of the Progressive Caucus, we held out, we held strong to pass the most robust possible Build Back Better Act that included really strong provisions for poor and working class people to create a more just society. We have the worst income and wealth inequality in 100 years, and we have a lot of work to do to change it. Thanks.
Representative Stevens.
Yeah, were you saying, Andy, that I answered this question?
Yeah, I was going to say, she went first, so you're on to the next.
First, but I'm happy to
Absolutely.
keep talking.
No, we're good. We're good. Okay, next question. Across our country, reproductive rights and access to abortion are under attack. Republicans-led state legislatures have enacted a near complete ban on abortion in Texas and are passing similar laws in other states. The Supreme Court's conservative majority will soon issue a ruling that may overturn the protections set by Roe versus Wade. As members of Congress, how will you act to protect access to abortion and reproductive rights? Congresswoman Stevens, we will start with you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Look, as a congresswoman from Michigan, we know that if Roe v. Wade is repealed, that it will go into effect in the state of Michigan because we do not have the protections in our own state, or what is called a trigger state. So in addition to legislating in the Congress, and I'm on all the bills to protect a woman's right to choose. We just passed the Women's Health Protection Act, which I was an original co-sponsor of, and I'm obviously a member of the Women's Caucus and the Choice Caucus and doing the work alongside my colleagues. I'm also working with our state representatives here in Michigan to get us to a place where we wouldn't have that trigger. So this is why I go out and door knock for city council candidates. This is why I work with our state house candidates and then when they get elected so that we can be united in this charge. And I'm obviously also working alongside our beloved Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence, who is the leader of the Women's Caucus in the Congress and is helping us to ensure that this does not get repealed. If it does, it will be all hands on deck. It is an all hands on deck moment in this Congress. And I really do see this as a big reason why I am in the Congress and why I'm so eager to get back to do this work for the people, the young girls, the women who are watching. Thank you.
Senator Levin.
Thanks, Haley. My fervent dedication to reproductive justice is informed by my lifelong dedication to human rights and the Jewish tradition of respecting individual dignity and bodily autonomy. The Jewish doctrine of Pikuach Nefesh emphasizes that the preservation of human life always overrides other aspects of halakha, like observing Shabbat or fasting on Yom Kippur. We must protect women's lives and prioritize their health, their well-being, and their safety. Period. Judaism also emphasizes kavod habriot, the affirmation of human dignity, which guides us to uphold individual autonomy and the affirmation of each person's unique needs. Through these teachings and the Jewish spirit of community and care, my faith deepens my commitment to support abortion providers and patients alike. This isn't a time to just vote right. I'm on the pro-choice caucus. I'm an original co-sponsor of the Women's Health Protection Act, and the Reproductive Freedom for All ballot initiative is something that's really important to me here in Michigan. But I felt like I had to go further. So this month, I introduced the first ever resolution in Congress to recognize Abortion Provider Appreciation Day. You know what? When Roe v. Wade is overturned, we're going straight back to 1931 law in Michigan, and abortion will be criminalized. We have to do everything we can to stand up in this moment and lead to reproductive justice. Thanks.
Thank you. Fighting climate change is a human rights, economic, and national security imperative, and one of the most pressing issues for Jewish voters, according to recent polling. Of course, you can't talk about climate change in Michigan, the center of the American auto industry, without also talking about jobs. With that in mind, what policies do you support to address the climate crisis, and how will you ensure that Michiganders benefit from good-paying green jobs? Since we committed to alternating the orders of the questions, Representative Levin, we will start with you for the next two questions, this one and the next one. I apologize about any mix-up. So over to you, Congressman Levin.
No problem. You're doing great. This is really the center of my life in Congress. I am all green. All 7 environmental groups that have endorsed me, and I'm all union. And so I feel like we have to put the most affected workers at the center of the table when we talk about climate change. I have introduced, first of all, I've supported the Green New Deal from the beginning, and I'm one of a small number of representatives who support all the Green New Deal bills, including the one Elizabeth Warren and I wrote, the Build Green Act. I mentioned my EV Freedom Act, which has a big emphasis on the rights of workers baked right into it. I also introduced with Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio, the American Energy Worker Opportunity Act. And this is what I think gets to the nub of it. It's not the fault of fossil fuel workers if they built up over decades that it's a great job to work in those industries. So our bill holds them harmless, gets them on the side of taking full-on action to save our planet right now by protecting their wages, a path to retirement, their health care, even giving their kids free college. So we can get everybody on board with taking robust action to save our planet.
Representative Stevens.
Well, look, I have certainly lived this, having served in the Obama administration when we implemented the Recovery Act, and we saw that we could merge industry interests with environmental interests. And now we are at an incredible moment with the Build Back Better plan that proposes getting us to net zero carbon emissions, something that I was very proud to work alongside the League of Conservation Voters on last year. And they led this whole great campaign throughout Michigan's 11th district, getting signs in people's yards. I'm a climate voter. I'm a climate voter. But in that legislation, we've got an investment, right, in electric vehicle technology and incentive. And if we get that done, right, we're obviously adhering to where industry is going, but we're also beginning to adhere to this goal of getting us to net zero by 2030. I've mentioned I'm on the science committee. This is a big part of the charge and the reason I am on the science committee, participating in the first hearing in almost a decade on climate science, starting the Plastic Solutions Task Force. This is a task force that I started in the Congress, bipartisan, by the way, bringing all the different stakeholder groups together, because we've got to look at the suite of environmental solutions. And you asked about jobs, Haley, and I think, and I know through my plastics work, that there are supply chain jobs, there are opportunities here for us in Michigan, and we can continue to go and get this done. So thank you so much.
Great. And our last domestic policy question. As Jews and as Americans, we understand the importance of humane immigration policies that accept refugees and asylum seekers and provide pathways to citizenship for those already here, including in Michigan. Share your views on immigration policy and on the gridlock on immigration and refugee reform policies in Congress. Congressman Levin will go first.
Well, thanks. So I've been involved in this issue since Congress passed the Immigration Reform and Control Act in 1986, which was a big disaster by putting enforcement of immigration laws into the workplace. Didn't work, obviously, but I created an organization called IRATE, Immigrant Rights, Advocacy, Training, and Education. And we drafted language for local unions to protect their undocumented workers. And then when I was in law school, I handled asylum claims for Haitian refugees who were fleeing after the first democratically elected president of Haiti was overthrown. And I'm very active on these issues as a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee. I'm really glad that the president announced that we are going to let 100,000 refugees from Ukraine in, and it's about time, and I'm glad he heard the call there. But we have to have a more humane immigration policy overall. We have to bring the 11 million undocumented workers out of the shadow and give them a path to citizenship. Of course, that includes the dreamers, it includes farm workers, but really all of them. And we have to have really revitalize our policies on asylum and refugees. This is core to Jewish values. It's something I've worked on forever. So example, I can't just celebrate more Ukrainian immigrants coming in. We supported 20,000 Haitian migrants this year. Thanks.
Thank you. Representative Stevens.
Well, you guys know the soundbite. Our immigration system is broken. You hear that all over Congress, but the reality is it's broken because we haven't passed a law in 20 years. We got people who are waiting for their citizenship. I'm out collecting petition signatures for my campaigns over the years, and I can't tell you how many people I run to in Michigan's 11th district who say, I wish I could sign. I've been waiting for my citizenship for 15 years. So we have got to put into place an immigration system that is fair, that is safe, and that is equal. We have a refugee crisis in this world, obviously in Ukraine, but we had a refugee crisis before this. I traveled down with my colleagues to the southern border. I went over there to Mexico and saw what was going on, and I saw what was happening in our own ICE detention facilities. It's young people who are in there. It's young people who want access to the American dream. And something that this organization and its members know is that if the American dream is for Americans only, then it is no longer such a dream, right? So we have got to get a real immigration plan done in this country. We've got to deal with the dreamers and get that granted and enshrined once and for all. And I'm working with the stakeholders on this. Again, the small businesses who I visit every week, they want access to these workers. Let's get this done. I'm going to continue to work on it while I'm in the Congress. And thank you for supporting this, JDCA.
Thank you. We will now move into a section on foreign policy, beginning with the 4-week Russian war against Ukraine. As Russia continues to escalate its unprovoked and unconscionable attacks on the people of Ukraine, what additional steps should the United States take to stop Putin's aggression and end this war? Should the Biden administration establish a red line in terms of Putin's actions that would lead to direct military involvement on behalf of the United States? We'll start with Representative Stevens.
Well, it's fitting because shortly before we were on today's forum, the president was having his press conference and he was answering this very question. And I have a lot of respect for President Biden and his foreign policy background. And I am not in the business of telling him what to do and what decisions to make, but I do want to support the efforts that we've taken with sanctions, which he said, listen, the sanctions aren't going to necessarily stop them in their tracks, but it is going to squeeze Russia over a period of time and impact their ability to even be successful in this brutal, unprovoked, wholly unacceptable war that they have started in Ukraine. I have also just today signed on to a letter saying, okay, we did the 100,000 refugees, but we got it from Ukraine, but we've got to look at doing more. Now, President Biden is saying a lot of the refugees want to stay in Europe. They want to stay close to home and with other relatives or people that they know. But I think that ramping up sanctions is going to be important. And the other thing is that we do have to look at red lines like chemical weapons that might be used, as well as some of the other threats that Mr. Putin has made. I've been battling this man since I was in Congress. He's got my constituent, Paul Whelan from the 11th District, falsely in prison. I've been working on freeing Paul. This is a madman who's got to be stopped. Thank you.
Thank you. Congressman Levin.
Thanks. Well, I currently represent one of the most vibrant Ukrainian American communities in the United States, and I'd be thrilled to represent many of the same constituents in the new 11th. As a member of the Ukraine Caucus and the House Foreign Affairs Committee, I've long utilized my platform to advance the U.S.-Ukraine relationship. Sadly, today, I have to use it to support U.S. efforts to end Putin's bloody assault on Ukraine, where he's committing war crimes every single day. I am not for the US or NATO going to war with Russia. That risks taking an unspeakable tragedy and magnifying it many, many times, including increasing the threat of thermonuclear war. There are 3 principles that guide my thinking on this. Number 1, we must maintain Ukraine's sovereignty. It's unbelievable how brave President Zelensky and the people of Ukraine have been. Number 2, we've got to keep providing military assistance and humanitarian assistance, basically on an unlimited basis, whatever they need, and we are doing that. Third, we've got to stay the course with sanctions and accountability, keep ratcheting them up until Ukraine's geographic integrity is restored. I have to say, as a Jewish American, Putin's dehumanizing language about Ukrainians and his own people, in fact, who dare to defy him, and his absurd claims about Ukraine being a Nazi state are particularly disturbing to me. Thanks.
Thank you. Congress recently passed a historic U.S. funding package, which included $4.8 billion in military aid for Israel. JDCA strongly supports the 10-year U.S.-Israel Memorandum of Understanding that was signed by the Obama-Biden administration in 2016, providing for $38 billion in military assistance and life-saving missile defense programs. Do you support U.S. aid to Israel pursuant to the MOU with no cuts, conditions, or restrictions? And did you support additional funding for Iron Dome? First, Congressman Levin.
Thanks. So that's a bunch of questions in one. So I do not support conditioning aid to Israel. And I believe strongly that we should and will maintain our obligations under the Obama administration's 10-year security assistance MOU with Israel. And of course, I voted for the additional $1 billion to replenish the Iron Dome as part of the FY 2022 omnibus spending. So that's all very clear. It's important to ensure that our military aid to Israel is used for legitimate security purposes. This is something that we do with our aid to every other nation as well. We don't want to have our aid used to perpetuate or extend the occupation or execute unjust actions like home demolitions, forced displacements, or violence against civilians. Incidents like the potential demolition of homes of 300 people in the village of Al-Walaja, potentially happening right now, harm innocent families and push the prospects for peace farther away. Finally, if I have a minute, I have to offer my condolences to the 4 victims of the stabbing attack in Beersheba this week, and refuah shlema to the 2 individuals injured. It just emphasizes the importance of us staying close with Israel. Thanks.
Representative Stevens.
So I support the tenets of the MOU that was signed in the Obama administration, and I do not support conditioning aid to Israel. I have been a very proud and consistent member of Congress on appropriating aid to Israel for purposes of national security, as well as economic development, the economic development relationship that we have between the 2 nations. Obviously, the security assistance is exclusively for those purposes. As it pertains to the Iron Dome, I have traveled to Israel. I traveled to Israel in 2019 with dozens of members of the freshman class of 2018, and stood in front of the Iron Dome in a bipartisan way, recognizing and seeing what our investment goes towards. So not only did I support the additional aid for the Iron Dome, I helped lead my colleagues in this term in Congress when it was being called into question, saying that we need to provide the Iron Dome funding. We know that the Iron Dome protects countless innocent lives in the region and in Israel, and safety and security is paramount for our only democratic ally in the region. And so I have been a proud defender and supporter of the security assistance that's gone to Israel, as well as the relationship between the 2 countries overall.
Thank you. During the Trump administration, humanitarian aid to assist the Palestinians and the Palestinian Authority was withheld. It has now been restored under the Biden administration. Do you support the United States providing humanitarian assistance to the Palestinians? And are there any conditions that you think should apply to this assistance? Representative Stevens will go first.
Absolutely. I was astonished to see that the Trump administration pursuing and perpetuating a lot of the hateful policies that they've into place. One of the reasons why I ran for Congress in the first place was because of the budget cuts being proposed by his administration, and certainly the cuts to the humanitarian aid for the Palestinian people have been unacceptable. And I have supported that the Biden administration's budget and what went forward there. And frankly, I think that we have to continue to promote peace in this region, and we will do so by recognizing the humanitarian principles principles that that come with our United States leadership. And look, our real problem in the region is Iran and Iran's funding of terrorist groups that wreak havoc on Israel and Israel's safety and security. And so the initiatives that I am also interested in and engage on as a member of Congress is preventing the funding of terrorist groups that harm innocent lives in the region. We saw this happen just last summer, and I spoke out about it, but also spoke out for the humanitarian need to recognize all innocent people in the region. Thank you.
Congressman Levin.
Thanks. Well, I absolutely support resuming aid to humanitarian aid to the Palestinians. I think it's important to recognize that the United States has very careful policies in place and controls about the way that aid is given so that it doesn't get into the wrong hands and so that it's really used to help the humanitarian situation in terms of medical needs, housing, and so forth. I also think we have to go further, though. The U.S. has to resume our role of helping bring the Palestinian and Israeli people together. So, for example, I want to breathe new life into Nita Lowey's initiative just before she retired of increasing people-to-people connections, diplomacy, business, and so forth. And I want to increase aid, non-government aid, not just humanitarian aid, but to human rights groups, rule of law groups, civil society groups to help democracy flourish in the Palestinian territories, because unless there's a legitimate democratic state there, there's no way to have a two-state solution. Thanks.
It has been longstanding U.S. policy in consecutive Republican and Democratic administrations to support a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. What policies and actions do you support to preserve prospects for two states? First, Congressman Levin.
Well, Haley, I am perhaps the leading Jewish member of Congress to try to actually take action to preserve the possibility of a two-state solution. My Two-State Solution Act, which I introduced and has support from many Jewish organizations, would try to induce the Palestinians to come into compliance with the Taylor Force Act. It would, as I just mentioned, increase assistance to human rights and rule of law and civil society organizations in the Palestinian territories. It would make sure that our aid doesn't extend or the occupation or certainly lead to de facto or de jure annexation. And it would really resume American leadership, which has been lacking for a long time in really driving towards two states. Frankly, I don't see a way to have a secure, peaceful future for a democratic homeland for my people unless we realize the political and human rights of the Palestinians. I know it's difficult. I know it's controversial. I didn't sign up for the easy work. I'm going to stand in the breach and work with Israelis and Palestinians to bring the parties together to work to a two-state solution so that at long last we can have peace and security in the neighborhood. Thanks.
Representative Stevens.
Yeah, so the status of the West Bank and Gaza has been long disputed, and I believe in a two-state solution, as you stated. It is a long-held bipartisan belief. We have support, and I certainly support Israel's existence as a Jewish state. We are not going to get to a two-state solution, though, in my opinion, by negotiating it as the United States of America or through the U.S. House of Representatives. We need to foster an environment similar to what was done during other peace talks and negotiations so that both parties can negotiate a two-state solution talk. And we cannot do so under the presumption and encouraging Israel to make all the concessions in that process. We are right now in an environment where the head of Amnesty International has called into question Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. I find that wholly unacceptable and offensive to my beliefs and to where I think we need to be as a country and as a world. And I'm not afraid to call that out. So in terms of how we foster as the United States of America an opportunity for two-state solution, I encourage the Biden administration to bring parties together, but we need to continue to support the countries that coming together to make that decision themselves, not trying to negotiate that as members of Congress.
Thank you. In 2018, President Trump recklessly withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal and enacted a campaign of maximum pressure, which yielded minimal results. Since that time, Iran has withdrawn from the agreement and accelerated its nuclear development. Do you support the Biden administration's efforts to negotiate a compliance for compliance return to the JCPOA as a means of ensuring Iran does not acquire a nuclear weapon or nuclear weapons capability? And if not, what alternatives exist? Congresswoman Stevens, we'll start with you.
Right. Well, look, I am very much in favor of a diplomatic resolution to the threat of Iran's pursuit to procure or produce a nuclear weapon. Simply put, Iran cannot produce a nuclear weapon or gain access to one. And I don't necessarily believe that the JCPOA accomplished those goals, and I don't think it's acceptable to have changing foreign policy on the whims of presidential elections. We need to be consistent. But in terms of what the Biden administration is doing, I would encourage the Biden administration to be strong, to be consistent, and I would like to see what they are putting forward and certainly assist the administration in their efforts to make sure that Iran does not produce or procure a nuclear weapon. And these negotiations are still ongoing. And so in terms of where my position is I'm not going to rule anything out. I want to see where it is, but I would prefer strength and consistency in that region. Thank you.
Congressman Levin.
History has proven that the JCPOA represented the best solution available to deal with the threat of a nuclear Iran. It put Iran's program in a lockbox, and it provided a high level of transparency with international monitoring and inspections that were permanent. In fact, the highest level of transparency ever achieved. Iran's nuclear weapons breakout time was 2 to 3 months and shrinking when we entered into the JCPOA. While the agreement was in force, it was 12 months. Now it's virtually nothing. I participate in a lot of classified briefings. I can't give an exact number of days, but it's way too few days. The horrible mistake that Trump made in violating and walking away from not a US-Iran deal, but a 7-nation agreement means we can't get back up to a year, but we could get at least halfway there, and more importantly, freeze it there for years to come. In short, I support an agreement on a compliance for a compliance basis so that Iran is as far as possible from obtaining nuclear weapons and stays that way. That's best way to maintain US security, Israeli security, and global security. But don't just take my word for it. A wide range of veteran Israeli military experts now agree that Trump's withdrawal from the agreement has been a complete disaster. And finally, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We've got to take nuclear weapons off the table and continue to battle Iran's malign activity in other arenas. Thanks.
Thank you both for your thoughtful answers to our questions. You will now have the opportunity for 2-minute closing statements. Congressman Levin, we'll start with you.
Well, thanks so much to you and to JDCA for having this fantastic forum. I've really enjoyed the discussion. You know, as I reflect on my time being in Congress and my running for Congress and for re-election in this new 11th district, I really think of 3 things that I stand for and that I stand on. First of all, I have a long history of being a bold progressive who has created policies that have changed people's lives. I created the No Worker Left Behind program in Michigan that put 162,000 workers back to school to study for in-demand jobs, green jobs programs, union summer at the AFL-CIO, and so much more. And in Congress, I'm a bold progressive fighting for the big changes we need. Secondly, I will do what's right no matter what, and I'm not going to curry favor or be afraid. And so, for example, I voted against our leadership. I do every year on the National Defense Authorization Act because it's too darn much money for the military and for war and not enough for diplomacy and human needs. And secondly, I voted against a bad trade agreement against the leadership because I knew the new NAFTA would not take apart the protection contract system and the company union system in Mexico. The third thing is I'm one of the most effective members of the new crop of people in Congress. I have introduced bold legislation and I've gotten a lot done in a bipartisan fashion. There's not enough time to go into the details, but for example, I passed the Jobs Act with Republican support recently. I passed bills under both the previous president and this president to prevent harmful incineration of PFAS chemicals. And unbelievably for me, I have the bill for free community college that President Biden wants to pass, and we're going to do it at long last. Thank you very much.
Congresswoman Stevens.
Well, thank you all so much for today's forum. I'm really looking forward to continuing the conversation and working with all of you during my time in Congress. I will just share that my motto is to listen, learn, and lead in that order. And that is what I have done as a Democrat in a Republican-leaning district where I have taken on bold positions like co-sponsoring the raising the minimum wage, holding the president accountable through impeachment, and supporting paid family leave. And I've also done so by working with my colleagues and bringing people together. I was proudly elected co-president of the largest freshman class since the Nixon years to Congress, and in that role, just continue to bring my colleagues together so that we could get things done for the American people. I mentioned that I got my Building Blocks of STEM Act signed into law at the very end of 2019. And with that, also the American Manufacturing Leadership Act. I have been a champion for Michigan's economy, the economy of Michigan's 11th district, and the people who it represents. We have got to put workers and families at the forefront of everything we do. And that is why I took the calls during the pandemic, dark into the night, making sure people were getting access to resources. And the results speak for themselves. I have record-breaking constituent services with over $43 million returned to the people of Michigan's 11th district. I had the largest number of earmarks for this last budget that we got done, with $18 million returned to the people of Michigan's 11th district, funding projects like police safety, as well as water treatment cleanup. So I'm looking forward to continuing to be with all of you. And thank you to the nearly 300 people who got on to listen to today's forum.
Thank you both so much. I want to thank our candidates for being with us today and for engaging in this thoughtful conversation. Additional thanks to both of you for adhering to the rules to ensure it was productive. And thanks to the hundreds of you watching from home, including in Michigan's 11th district. I'd now like to invite Michigan chapter co-lead Adam Blank to end with some important information about voting in Michigan. Over to you, Adam.
Thank you, Haley. On behalf of the JDCA Michigan chapter, I want to thank our candidates and all of you for joining us during today's forum. I also want to invite you to visit jewishdems.org/chapters, where you can sign up and join our chapter, including becoming a leader, and learn about our upcoming meetings, including our week of action in May. While there, you can explore our website and learn about our national programs and how to become a JDCA member. Early voting in Michigan begins June 23rd, and the primary is August 2nd. And of course, the general election is on November 8th. Every vote matters in this critical primary, and we encourage you to support the candidate of your choosing and make a plan now to vote in the primary election. Thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of the day, wonderful rest of your day. And for those of you in Michigan, don't forget to vote on or before August 2nd. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.